consider. What personal characteristics they look out for include interpersonal skills, feedback from current residents. So in the past, before COVID, one would have needed to go to the different institutions you're applying to, and then you interact with the residents, and then they get feedback from the residents in terms of what they think about the applicants. And then things like interaction with our staff during the interview. These are some of the very highly rated characteristics that are looked out for by program directors. And then this is just a statistic, summary statistics on US grads. I didn't get so much on IMGs, but this kind of lists some of the factors that were considered. And this table shows the difference between the matched and the unmatched. So USMLE scores, for those unmatched, an average score of 248, unmatched was 241. Step 2 score, a main score of 252, and for unmatched 248. Research experiences, main number of abstracts, presentations, and publications. You can see it's quite a huge number. And then work experiences, volunteer experiences. So I'll talk more about all of this later. This just shows us data about what is available. And then these are predictors for matching into neurosurgery for graduating medical students who are neurosurgery. So just a little bit similar to what I showed earlier. So USMLE scores, step 2 scores, number of abstracts and presentations. No. So what makes a competitive portfolio for neurosurgery? USMLE scores, one's grades in medical school. So if you're a US grad, your grades in medical school and your class rank, while for IMGs, there's this MSP, this medical student performance evaluation that you get from your institution, which kind of attests to your performance as a medical student. And then your research and publications, letters of recommendation, sub-internships or observership programs that you might have undergone, and volunteering experience. So let's just take this one after the other. So for medical school performance, like I mentioned earlier, your grades are quite important. So typically, they look at the best of the best in terms of medical school performance, and then your class ranking. So for the US residency program, you need to have written your USMLE test. So there are 3 tests in total. Step 1, step 2. Step 2 used to be step 2 CS and step 2 CK, and then step 3. However, because of COVID, or during the COVID era, step 2 CS got cancelled and alternative pathways were instituted for people to get certified, ECFMG certified. So step 1 also this year, I think January 26th this year, became a pass or fail exam. It used to be a numerical score, a 3-digit score. But now it's now pass or fail. And the challenge with that is that step 1 used to be like a screening tool in terms of getting people in for interviews and screening people out from interviews. And one of the things IMGs used to aim for was to get like very wild step 1 scores to kind of open doors to them. But now that it's become a pass or fail system where a numerical score is not reported, the emphasis now has been postulated to be step 2 CK. And since that just happened this year, we're yet to see what data would be from the program directors survey from next year, March, to show what program directors are looking at now in terms of screening in or screening out applicants. But different people have postulated that step 2 CK and then a lot other things like in terms of your research and other things will be focused on. But step 2 CK still remains an exam with a numerical score. And so one has to strive to really nail very high scores on step 2. And then you don't need to write step 3 before applying. It doesn't give any added advantage. Some people say it does, but from reviewing data, there's really no added advantage in terms of whether you've written step 3 or not. So, and then after writing step 1 and step 2 CK, then you look at what ECFMG pathways are available. There are about 6 of them. And then you see which suits you better. One of the ones that I know a lot of people are taking is the one, pathway 1, where you write a test of English proficiency once you're already licensed to practice medicine in another country. So you write a test of English proficiency, that's the OET, and then with that, your step 1 and your step 2 CK scores, you can then apply for your CFMG certification. The challenges IMGs face are lower match rates, visa status, and then their IMGs typically have to go through additional pathways to be competitive. And this results in longer post-graduation period. So because IMGs are, the match rates for IMGs are typically lower, so IMGs have to do additional things to beef up their portfolio just to make themselves competitive. So this usually results in additional number of years. And some of the pathways IMGs typically take include pursuing advanced degrees such as Masters of Science, public health degrees, and PhD programs, or undergoing a research fellowship. So a research fellowship, basically you're a research fellow conducting either clinical or basic science research at a facility. Another pathway is pre-residency fellowship, where some programs offer accredited pre-residency fellowships either for a year or two. A couple of programs offer that. So I know Boston does that. Boston Medical Center does that. Lahey does that. Lahey Hospital does that. And then so you can just check neurosurgery residency, pre-residency fellowship programs. So and then see what the requirements are. Some of them require you to have some form of either visa status in terms of either a permanent resident or you're a citizen, while some don't. So it's very worthwhile to check what the requirements are before applying. Then some IMGs also apply for preliminary surgery programs. And so preliminary surgery programs is like a 1 year preliminary thing where you kind of do more like general surgery. And then one of the things IMGs do is when they go for their elective rotation, they typically pick neurosurgery, and that way they get known by neurosurgeons in that hospital, and then they try and build relationships and then reapply to the match in terms of getting to a neurosurgery residency program. Some IMGs would have completed residency training in neurosurgery in their home country, and then after that transition to the US just to show commitment, get more research paper done, show a lot of clinical skills. And then some people also undergo postdoctoral fellowships under a neurosurgeon, scientist or a neurosurgeon in a neurosurgery program in the US. So when it comes to the US clinical experience, for people who are already US medical students, they typically do sub-internships either at their own programs or they go for external rotations. And while for IMGs, typically do either clinical observerships just to get some clinical experience, which is quite important in the sense that it helps one with letters of recommendation. It helps with networking, so they can put a face to the name. So when you're applying, you just don't want to be an unknown entity. But if you've already rotated through a particular hospital or a particular program, they already know you. You can leverage on your network, on what networking you might have done there. Then it also opens doors for mentorship opportunities in terms of getting a mentor who will be very beneficial in the long run in pursuing this USMLE or this residency process. Then also opens doors to research opportunities. I must state that for observerships, because of the visa limitation, if one is going to be on either a tourist visa or business visa, it kind of limits what you can do clinically. So one might not be able to have like hands-on experience with research in terms of public clinical research, because you can't really handle patient stuff and all of that. But I think one can write papers and get some of the people there to be a senior authors and things like that. So opens doors to research opportunities. And then even subsequently, if one is going to pursue a research fellowship program, it can open such doors to you. When it comes to clinical experience or clinical observerships, one of the things that's very important is to get involved and to help and impress the residents as much as you can, because one of the things they look out for is not just being an island by yourself, one of the things they look out for is how well you're able to work on with it with other people, work as a team, and then they get a lot of feedback from the residents. So of course, you work more with the residents than with the attendings. So one wants to really be in the good books rather of the residents, and then some of the things that one can help do is in terms of case reports or write a case report for an interesting case you might have seen, or data analysis and things like that, just to help with some form of research. And then fast turnaround time on assignments or projects. So if you're given any assignments or projects, do you really want to get it done on time to show some commitment and that you're really into this? And then another thing one can do is you can target places where you intend to match as where you'd want to have the where you want to go for clinical experiences. So if you're looking at a particular facility or a particular hospital where you are looking to match, you might want to target there for your clinical experience. So research, which is a very, very big part in terms of building one's portfolio. According to the 2018 NRMP matching outcomes, the average number of abstracts, presentations, and publications for those matching into neurosurgery was 18.3, which is a very huge number. And the two types of clinical of research basically are either clinical or basic science research. Basic science research involves being at a lab, and then the other ways one can get research is to either do a research fellowship or volunteer as a research assistant. And opportunities can be discovered either by searching institution websites. So you can check different institution websites to see if they have research opportunities, or if you have society websites such as the CNS, AANS, that's the American Association of Neurological Surgeons, and CNS is the Congress of Neurological Surgeons. So you can check society websites to see what opportunities there might be. And then connections you've made during your electives, which I mentioned earlier, your clinical experience. So you can transition from doing an elective to getting into a research fellowship if that institution has that. And then you can email specific physicians in your field and ask if they have laboratories where you can volunteer or you can be a research assistant. And one of the major measures of productivity, so it's not just about having research exposure alone. They're looking at the number of publications or abstracts you have. So quantity really matters, and it's not so much about just pushing shabby papers out, but getting a good number of papers accounts for how productive one would be. So if one is undergoing a research fellowship for a year, one needs to get like a substantial number of papers out. So not just maybe one or two, because they're looking at people who are quite productive. And then authorship is also considered in terms of are you a first author, are you a second author, or you're just somewhere random down the line. If, for instance, you're undertaking a research year to do research, authorship would really be will be considered very strongly, because that's like a significant time. But if it's just maybe for a short period of time, getting your name on papers is what might really matter. But authorship, one should strive to get as many first author papers as possible. I mean, it might not be feasible if you're doing it for a short period of time, but if it's for a longer period of time, I think it's important to get that done. Then letters of recommendation. So typically you need about 4 letters. For US grads, they would either get 2 from 2 clinical neurosurgeons, and then from either a subspecialty clerkship or general surgery clerkship. And then the 4th letter is usually from a research mentor or an additional neurosurgery letter. For IMGs, US letters are very important because the neurosurgery community is closely knit, so they kind of know one another. So one wants to know, they want to know who knows you, who have you worked with, who is ready to vouch for you in terms of your clinical proficiency, your research abilities. And IMGs typically get letters from research programs that they might have gone through, probably volunteered or research fellowships or clinical electives that they might have rotated through. And the other thing to consider, this particularly holds true for IMGs, is the visa status, which is a very big factor. There are 2 visa types for IMG, non-US IMG, so that's the J1 and the H1B visa. So the J1 visa, typically after completion of residency program, it requires one to return to one's home country for 2 years, except one is able to get a waiver. And while the H-1B does not require one to do that. However, the H-1B visa is not readily sponsored as such because there was a cut in the GMA funding in 2016. So it's not as funded as the J1 visa now. So many residents are typically on the J1 visa, but then except one gets a waiver, one might need to return to one's own country for about 2 years before going back into the US if one is on a J1 visa, or you can apply for permanent residency. So for IMGs, postgrad years, and like I mentioned earlier, because of the fact that they have to undergo additional pathways just to make themselves competitive, one of the concerns is that if you've been out of clinical practice for a while, say maybe what you've been doing is research, there might be some concern about how good one's clinical skills would still be. So one of the ways you can make up for that is either going to cadaver labs or workshops to kind of own your clinical skills, and then you can join clinics or shadow attendings during research year. So how to know when to apply? I don't think there's a particular formula to this, but after one has undergone a careful planning in terms of building up your portfolio, mentorship is really, really important when it comes to this. Your mentor, who should be a neurosurgeon, if possible, in the US, should be discussed with at length in terms of where you stand and what your chances are. And then you can reach out to program directors or residents in programs you're looking at, and then trying to interact and what they think of you to network. And then one should focus on where one has done research or electives, because there you're already known to an extent. So that you stand a little bit more chance there in terms of they already know you, and if you've been able to leave a good impression and you've gotten strong letters of recommendation from them, that might be helpful. Then to apply wide, but because of the low match rate for IMGs are often encouraged to apply to as many programs as possible. I've heard people say that this is counterproductive, that you should apply to 10 to 20 programs, and then because the cost implication also when it comes to application. But I think applying to as many programs as possible might be a good idea, because you don't know where you're going to get interviews, and because IMGs don't really get as many interviews, so you just want to cast your net wide. So the interview process itself is so after one's application has been submitted through errors, then if you're considered for an interview and you get called for an interview now, because of COVID, it's virtual. So one of the things one can do is to read about the programs ahead of time and the resources available, so that at the interview you're not sounding like you don't know what's going on. You really want to be able to put your best foot through the door. So an interview process is like a door has been opened to you, and you really want to make the best of it, and then try to sell yourself on your unique experiences, what makes you stand out as a candidate, essentially. Unlike before, where you had to interact with the house staff and then the residents in the program, it's mainly virtual now. So it's basically how you're able to sell yourself. And then the ranking process, after the interviews, the applicants and the program director submit a rank list in order of preference to the NRMP, which then uses an algorithm to match applicants to program. So this is actually a very interesting aspect of the whole match process, whereby you submit. So if you've interviewed at a program, you rank in order of preference in terms of which ones your most preferred institution. So you rank them in that order. And then the program directors also rank candidates that have interviewed with them in that order. And then the system then uses this algorithm to match programs to applicants to programs rather. And then it's commonly advised that one should match all programs one has interviewed at, and then also to discuss with mentors on one's rank list. So like I said, the information regarding this is quite enormous, but some of these other places I found really helpful in terms of getting all this information. And one can do further reading is there's this site neurosurgerymatch.org, and then there's this webinar series by the NREF, which is the Neurosurgery Research and Education Foundation. So I think it would be beneficial if one goes through this additional sites just to get more information and in preparation for the match process. So thank you very much. I think that's about all.
All right, thank you so much, Okatara, for that insightful session. Before I want to, if you have any questions, please put it on the chat box so that the speaker can address them. I hope you guys can hear me. All right, so while we're waiting for the questions in the chat box, I think I have a few questions myself.
Okay.
All right, so for the first one, you said when during your presentation, you mentioned something about a pre-residency, that some programs or some hospitals in the US offer pre-residency opportunities. So I wanted to ask, are the steps or requirements for those pre-residency programs? And like, what is the typical length for that kind of program, like in time?
Okay. The pre-residency fellowships typically last either a year or two, so 1 year to 2 years, and then each pre-residency program has specific instructions or requirements for application. For Boston, I remember you have to have written your step 3 because you're going to get a limited license by the state. So the state is going to offer you a limited license, and then your visa status is also a consideration. So typically, it's best to go through whatever residency fellowship program and see what their specific requirements are. But it requires to have written the steps, because essentially what you do during pre-residency fellowships, you're almost like a PGY one. So you do IC, you do nights, you round with them, you do outpatient clinics and stuff like that. So you're almost like a resident. It's just that you're not in a residency program. And then you get paid, you get what's the name? So your salary equivalent is that of a PGY one, so you get compensation, monetary compensation. So, and then what that helps do is that it's like a foot through the door. They know you, they've seen what you can do clinically, you've done research with them, and then so some people usually transition from that into the residency program at wherever they did the pre-residency. Yeah.
All right. I think we have one question now. Someone's asking, in the UK, applying to train is national. Is it the same in the US?
So when you say national, I know for the US, what essentially happens is it's like it's a dedicated period of time, or usually around September, where you send in your applications, and then there's a program algorithm. So it's not just specific to neurosurgery alone. It's like everybody applies around that same period of time, and then you get your results by March the following year, which is usually March into March. So you get results of whatever it is. So applications are usually around September, thereabout, and then interviews are usually November, December, and then you get the results by March the following year. So I'm not quite sure what the person means by national, but it's a structured and standard process where you just apply during this specific time frame.
So I believe, because I'm training in the UK as a foundation doctor, I believe the question is for neurosurgery application in the UK, you apply nationally and then you are interviewed at a national level, and then everyone is ranked, and based on your ranking, you are allocated to different parts of the country. But from what you've said so far, I believe you have to have interview at each residency area. Okay, so yes, it's quite different.
So depending on where you apply to, so you apply to specific hospitals. So if you don't apply to an institution, you can't get interviewed there. So it's where you apply to that your applications are considered, and then you get interviewed. And then after getting interviewed, you then rank, the programs, and then the programs rank you, and then the algorithm then matches the applicant and then the program. So there's a very interesting video on the NRMP website that it's a 5-minute video that kind of describes the rank process in detail. So for those that are interested in checking that out.
All right, thank you very much. Please, if you have questions, put it on the chat box. Okay,
yeah,
then
thank you. Okay, sorry. Go ahead, Larry. No, go ahead. Yeah, yeah.
Right.
So, okay, thank you. Thank you very much. So, very good talk. I just wanted to ask, firstly, what's the benefits of training, like pros and cons of training in the US for neurosurgery, and what if you haven't had the opportunity to gain a clinical or research experience in the US? Is it impossible to get into the residency there?
So when it comes to pros and cons, I mean, I haven't experienced neurosurgery practice in the UK, so it might be difficult to say, but I know it's widely regarded as one of the best training. The US particularly is regarded as one of the best training opportunities for neurosurgery residency in the world. So I might not be able to give statistics in terms of which is better. Objectively, I might not be able to say that. But then, like you mentioned, in terms of if one has not had the chance, so I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's one of the things that one should try to, because you're trying to build up a competitive portfolio, right? And as an IMG, one is, I don't want to use the word disadvantaged already. So you're trying to make as many things count for you as possible. So which is why they suggest, get a US clinical experience where you are known already. So if you're in, for instance, you've done observership somewhere, they know you, they can put a face to the name. So if your application, for instance, shows up at that hospital, there are people who might have written you letters, who know you already, who know what you're able to do, and that can speak for you and things like that, because you really want to make as many things count positively for you as possible.
All right, thank you very much. I think we have another question. Someone is asking, concerning research, are researches in neurosurgery only considered in terms of outputs, or is it generally any form of research? And does undergoing residency in internal medicine or other programs in the US increase your chance of matching into neurosurgery?
Okay, so so for the first question, like I mentioned, research is measured by productivity. Typically, they consider what you've put out in terms of productivity. So research experience can be, I'm working in a lab, or I'm working with somebody in a research capacity. But then if you're not getting as many papers out, they don't really consider, it's like, you have so many resources, but you don't have so much output. They don't, it's like, I mean, from the webinars I've attended, program directors really frown at that. They really want to see you do something with what resources are available to you. So I think output is really important. And then one should not be pressed to just push out to predatory journals, or I mean, of course, you want to do good research. You don't want to do unethical practice and stuff like that, but you really want to put out good numbers. And then residency in internal medicine or other programs. One of the things when we're looking at the chart or the table where I talked about the personal characteristics that program directors are looking out for, one of the very important things is perceived commitment to specialty. So they really want to see that, this guy, what has his track record been? So they don't really want to see you going all over the place as much as possible. They really want people who are, it's almost like neurosurgery or nothing. That's the kind of way it's saying, like they really want that commitment to that pathway. So I'm not really sure if that would increase one's chances of matching. And then remember when they mentioned also in the pathways I just often undertake, it's the ones that are really considered are those that have finished residency programs in neurosurgery in their home countries and then transitioning to the US. So I'm not really sure residency in other specialties might confer any benefit. So I don't think so. I really don't think so. And there's another question in the chat box: research papers published while in medical school. I mean, as long as it's research that counts towards neurosurgery, research that counts towards neurosurgery, I think that's what matters. So, in terms of are you publishing along neurosciences, that's what really matters. Yeah. So, as long as it's good research, I think it counts for something. And
There's another question.
okay, so my boss, the person I work with, was the chairman of department at a neurosurgery institution in the US for 12 years. So for me, it's a thing of I'm gaining clinical experience, and then also I'm transitioning into I'm leveraging on his connections and his mentorship. He's my mentor. So and then because he still has strong ties with his program in the US, so I'm leveraging on that to transition into clinical observerships over there. And then with that, also working on research over here. So those are the things I'm getting from the present residency fellowship I'm doing. So there's some tie between the institution I work with and the program in the US where my boss was chairman of. So I'm looking at transitioning through that. And then any thoughts on transitioning from the UK to the US, early training or late training? For transitioning from the UK to the US, I think as long as it's still along the pathway of neurosurgery, I think I'm not sure if any whether transitioning in the early phase of training or late training would really matter as much as it's still within neurosurgery. And then the other thing one wants to consider is, like I mentioned, number of years post graduation. But as long as the number of years post graduations count towards something substantial, I think it shouldn't really matter much. But then there are some programs that kind of frown at the number of years you've had post graduation. So, before it's like there are preset inputs that kind of screen out candidates. So some programs will automatically screen out those who've had like a substantial number of years post graduation. So at the same time, you don't want it to be too long after graduation. But if, for instance, one finds oneself in that position, you really want to make sure that the years have really counted towards something. And then, is there a standardized points-based system for the application? No, not really. So it's more subjective. So what you do is you apply through errors, and then so the things you that are sent in are your USMLE scores. And I mentioned that there are pathways open now because of the cancellation of step 2 CS. So whichever pathway one decides to take, so your scores are evaluated. You fill in, you send in your scores, your CV, your personal statement. Then so you apply to multiple programs, and then your letters of recommendation, and then you apply to multiple programs, and then each program will then evaluate if this candidate is a good fit for our program. So, like I mentioned before, the USMLE Step 1 score was a very big factor in terms of screening in or screening out applicants. And but now that it's been changed to a pass or fail system, Step 2 CK score is what many people have postulated would be the new screening factor. So each program then screens based on that, and then your research, and then your US clinical experience, and then they then decide to offer you an interview or not. So application does not guarantee an interview. So depending on how competitive your portfolio is what will then guarantee you an interview. And then after the interview, based on your performance, you then rank, and then the algorithm then matches. So if you then, according to the algorithm, you match into a program, then you can get into a residency program. But if not, you have to try again the following year.
Sorry, Doctor, allow me to button before the next question. Relating to the ECFMG pathways, I understand you said the most common one now is pathway 1, where you're medically licensed. Okay, yes. So I'm saying for someone now who wants to say, do you have to get the get certification after a house job in Nigeria before you can apply for an ECFMG certification, or is there a way that you can boycott that process? Is what I'm asking.
So I think once you've gotten your full license to practice, and which is typically obtained after housemanship,
Yeah.
because before housemanship, what you have is a provisional license, but once you have this a full certification, then you can go ahead to apply, and you've completed your steps and other things.
Using the pathway 1.
Yeah, pathway 1. So and then you need to complete the examination. So I had to write. I'd written step 1, step 2 CK, and then I wrote OET, which is the test of English proficiency. Yeah.
All right.
So, and then if after all this, one does not match into neurosurgery, so there's this program called SOAP, which is almost like a supplementary program. So for those that did not match, but it's very unlikely because most neurosurgery programs are typically filled by the time the match process is done. So the SOAP is usually for programs that have unfilled positions, and then people can then apply for that. But it's very unlikely for neurosurgery. So, but if one falls into that category, I mean, the other thing is to you can seek feedback from where you interviewed to find out what they thought about your application and what they think the problem might have been, and then also one is to start working on building or improving on what you might have had in terms of applying the year before in preparation for the next process, because application is just once a year. And so if you don't match, if you don't get in, or you're unable to get in through the SOAP process, then you have to wait till next year, September. And meanwhile, during that period, one then needs to work on other things that you think you can improve on. Of course, you've written your exams, you can improve on your scores, but the other things that you think you can improve on, then one needs to work on those, and then discuss with your mentors. Your mentors will give you a broader view of what they think you can work on also. So I think it's a journey that requires multiple inputs from mentors, getting feedback from people who are already on this pathway already, and yeah. And then there's a question about the range of cost from start of application process to getting matched. So the number I have from what I've from what I reviewed in literature might not be accurate now, because before one needed to travel to different institutions for interviews, and the number then was about $10,000, to get that done. But right now, because interviews are virtual, so that's kind of cuts costs on the need to travel. But then the things you need to consider, depending on so you need to consider the fees you pay for your exams. I think step 1 costs $1,125. Yeah, $1,125 if I'm not mistaken, for an IMG if you're writing outside the US. Then step 2 costs the same amount. OET costs $425, which is 575 Australian dollars. And then you're going to pay for question banks. You're going to pay for what's it called? The NBME, which is almost like a mock exam. So all of those are like costs that crop up. And then in terms of the question says application, not just the OUSMLE journey. I thought it was the OUSMLE journey. So application process, it depends on the number of programs you're applying to, typically.
Sorry,
so
Doctor, I think you say the question is from the start of the application.
Of application,
like
yes.
Okay.
So it's not just, I thought it was just the whole USMLE journey. So it depends on the number of programs you apply to, and then also the cost of your ACFMG certification. You need to pay for ACFMG certification, and then after you get your ACFMG certificate, then you can start applying the program. So the number of programs you apply to would determine the overall cost. And then after applying to programs, and then you get matched, and then you now have to start. There's a whole lot of other payments you need to make in terms of whatever state you're practicing. You have to pay for a licensing fee over there. So I can't give you an average cost, but I know typically from my friends who have applied, I know people depend about $3,000, thereabouts, 3,000. My friend who applied in the last cycle did about $3,000, $4,000, although that was for internal medicine. But he applied to a lot of programs, like 100 programs and so. So yeah, so I can't. I'm unable to give you a sum, a fixed figure.
What an expensive journey.
Really expensive. Really
So
expensive.
would you like, what would be your advice? Would you say someone should gather the sum before starting the process, or just work with faith through the process?
Man, so I think that one is to count the cost of the journey and see, depending on how you plan on raising the funds. So if you have if your folks are going to be the ones supporting you through the process, then it means that you don't have to worry about the funds, right? And then, but if it's that you're going to be getting it from your savings, it means that you might have to delay your application till you have a substantial amount, because if you're going to be working for funds, it means that part of your savings will go into writing the exams itself, part of your savings will go into the application process. So I think, and then what some other people do is to get loans to offset the cost and all of that. But I think one just needs to identify what route you're going to take and then start planning towards it early. So if you're going to get your folks to pay for you, you have to let them know, give them a rough idea of what it will cost, so that they can get prepared. So.
I think we have another question. How does one go about visa application, and what determines type of visa?
So, like I mentioned, there are two visas that I just typically use, either the J1 or the H1B visa. The J1, so typically both of them are applied for. I mean, the H1B used to be applied for by the hospital, while the J1 is applied for by ECFMG. So you need to pay some fee to ECFMG to facilitate your J1 application, because it's for your residency program. So and then, like I mentioned, the H1B is the one that you don't require to go back to your home country after your residency program. While for the J1, so because funding was cut um, for the H1B visa, so most people now are on J1 visas. So most likely, if you're not a permanent resident or you're not a citizen, you're most likely going to be on a J1 visa for residency. Yeah, so clinical electives for medical students, I think it counts in terms of it's a US clinical experience, anyways. But then the other thing is, if you're doing it while in medical school, you also want to keep contact with people who probably supervised you over there when you return to your home country, so that you kind of maintain that network. Of course, you can request for it. You can let them know that you are targeting application towards this certain cycle, and then that you'll be needing a letter, because they will definitely keep your records of your electives with them. So if you're not due to apply at that point in time, or maybe the year after, you can let them know when you're targeting application, and then the essence is networking, letters of recommendation, and keeping in touch. So you want to keep the network, and then yeah. So I think clinical electives for medical students is a good one.
Sorry, to allude to your presentation earlier, you mentioned for the US graduates, like there was some, I think it was the NRP figure you showed, and you were saying like AOA status, class rank. Like, what are the things that medical students here can do to like the equivalent also in Nigeria, or sorry, or in other parts of the world that going
So
forward?
I think things like finishing top of your class. So if you have like, or you are the best graduating student in your stuff, that kind of stands you out, that, oh, this is like an A-star student kind of thing. And then your involvement in the area of specialization. So if you did like electives in neurosurgery here, and then the things you did during the electives also. So those are the kind of things that you can try and work on here as a Nigerian medical graduate. Okay, so there's a question about the difference between US clinical electives and externships and observerships. So they are kind of, I would say, maybe almost different terminology for the same, or for almost the same thing, because essentially what you're trying to do is you're trying to get into you're trying to get the clinical experience. So the observership can be an arranged thing from your institution, and then they can arrange like a 2 or 3 months observership with the institution. While a clinical elective is almost like you have rotations, and then you choose to do your rotation in a different facility. So basically, they're almost like different lingua for almost the same thing, essentially.
All right, thank you very much, Doctor. Please, if you have any questions, please post it on the chat box. Then I also wanted to ask, is it what's the word I want to use now? Is it possible, or is it to do the whole application process without going into the US? Like to run
Without
like going into the US? Like is it possible? I understand that there are some specialties, say internal medicine, where it's possible for you to build a portfolio and enter the cycle while you're still in Nigeria. Or would that be possible for like neurosurgery?
it's so I don't want to say not it's impossible, but it's gonna be really tough. It's gonna be really tough. It's gonna be really tough because you want to make as many things count for you as possible. So I know someone who matched into internal medicine or neurology and neurology without having to go to the US. Because the problem with, or the thing with neurosurgery, I don't want to say the problem, is it's very competitive. It's extremely competitive. So you want to cross your T's and dot your I's as much as possible. So as many things you think that you can get to work in your favor, you want to explore the opportunity. Of course, not it's it would require a lot of financial commitment. It will require a lot of extra time, and but you just want to, if it's what you really want to do, I think it's worth the extra steps. I think so. Yeah, and then the other thing is, I think I should mention is a community is really important because sometimes it could be a very lonely journey, and then there are days when you're like, man, why am I doing this? You get frustrated by the process. It looks like you're doing so much and yet you're doing so little. It sometimes feels that way, but I mean, having a community of people on the same pathway can be really encouraging and can be really helpful on days when you really don't feel like it.
Thank you very much, Dr. Is there? I don't know if there are any other questions. Please let's put them on the chat box. And Dr. David, too, if you have anything you want to contribute, or okay.
Oh yeah. So just random question. Do you think you can build like networks via like social media, like LinkedIn and so on? Maybe like connect with neurosurgeons there and just comment on their stuff, message them privately. If you have like built a portfolio in neurosurgery, tell them like your desire to come to the US, and if there's anything that could do to like help you towards achieving this.
Yeah, I think it's because of this social media age, I think it's one of the benefits of social media in terms of being able to network without being there physically, because you get to meet a lot of people. You get to get people to advise you and what they think you can do, what they think you should when to how to go about certain things. So I think it's really possible to interact with people on social media. So I know there are quite a number of neurosurgery uh, uh, attendings and even some program directors on Twitter. So you can just follow, and then of course, the whole thing about cold mailing people, and sometimes you get responses, sometimes you don't get a response. Let me share a fun fact. The Preresidency Fellowship I'm doing right now, I reached out to my boss on LinkedIn. It was on LinkedIn I connected, and then he invited me over to come to clinic with him, and then that's how I got a position. So I think it's possible. And I mean, this is one of the best things I think that has happened to me in terms of doing this. Yeah.
Thank you very very much for that. I think it's very important to try and reach out to people on, like, to leverage social media to your advantage.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask, what did I want to ask? So sorry, I heard there's this thing, I think was it I think it was the year before that the guys, like, the math cycle, when they released the math data, I think it was Massachusetts, Harvard Medical, the school there, and all of the guys I think three of them that matched neurosurgery all had PhDs. There was this rap that maybe to get into neurosurgery you do as an IMT. Because there was an IMT there too. Was a road scholar and had a PhD. So I'm like, is it a necessary thing, like, to get a postgraduate degree if you want to apply into neurosurgery?
Well,
Or any
I
other
don't
things?
think it's. I don't think it's. I used to think that way also, but I haven't listened to a couple of program directors' perspectives on this. They say that sometimes it even does. It might count against you in some instances. Like, it's not unwelcome if you have it, fine. But what matters is how does it influence your competitiveness. So, for instance, if during your PhD you've been able to put out a lot of research papers, it kind of shows that, oh, this is someone who is really adept in the research area. So, but then if you say maybe some other things are lacking on your portfolio. So, for instance, if it was during the period of physical interviews, and then you're not a really cool person to be around with, the residents have reservations about you. Those are the kind of things. So I don't think it's an automatic. It definitely increases your chances, but I don't think it's like, oh, it's an automatic thing to get into. And then, like I mentioned, most of these things are, so it's not like there's a clear cut box that you check and say this, and some of these are still very subjective. But I mean, the from what some program directors have said, advanced degree sometimes help, sometimes it doesn't.
Well, thank you. But I think another way to rephrase it is that, so for an IMG now who wants to apply, if you don't want to do or pursue an advanced degree, what other things could you do? Say you're done with house job and you're looking to apply into neurosurgery. I don't know what are the next steps. Like, what could you consider?
Okay, so if you remember that part where I kind of listed, there are quite a lot of options. So I talked about research fellowships. So doing a research fellowship is an option in the US, or doing a pre-residency fellowship is another option.
Or
Um, what's the name? Clinical experience is another thing you can do to kind of get your foot through the door. Aside advanced degrees, because I mean, advanced degrees also require another level of application, getting into a program, completing the program, and things like that. Yeah. So,
sorry, would you need to sort the issue of visas when you're applying to, say, for a research fellowship or a
yeah. So,
pre-research? Yeah.
yeah. So for the research fellowships, I think you have to be on a G1 visa for the research fellowships. So, you still need to get that sorted out also. Yeah.
So please, is there any other questions? Please post them in group. So, rounding up. So. So I think I have the what's the word now, the leverage to ask you a personal question. Um,
Okay.
so why did you choose? I mean, with all this hustle and all this stress and all this pain, why neurosurgery?
So I think for me, I'd always been fascinated by the nervous system, like right from a very maybe from secondary school. I've been fascinated by the nervous system, and growing, and then of course the classic Ben Carson inspiration and stuff like that. But then um, I think the reason why I prefer neurosurgery to neurology, in a sense, in terms of a still nervous system, is the fact that with surgery you identify a problem, you fix the problem, you start to see results. So I kind of like the approach to treatment as opposed to just medical aspects. So, for instance, the patient comes in with a subdural hematoma, you can see the midline shift, you can see the deterioration in the neurological status. Go in, get out the hematoma, patient starts to get better, right? So I kind of like the rapid response to treatment and the fact that yeah, you get to work with your hands. So I think that that's what it is for me for neurosurgery.
All right, thank you very much. Dr. Timdayo, I'd like to also hear your insight into why insight into the research.
Um, it's quite similar to Temitayo's answer actually, but so I mean in the UK, I mean I did secondary school in Nigeria actually, moved to the UK, did A levels and so on. During my A levels, I volunteered in a care home for elderly patients, and that was actually my first time of being around people that were ill. And a lot of them had dementia, and I felt helpless back then, and I felt I want to make a difference. I looked at my interest as well. I was very interested in science, and I just combined that my interest in science and also my fascination about the nervous system and how things could go wrong and how the illness doesn't affect the patient only; it also affects their family. So that was what got me interested in like neuroscience in the first place. And then I go into medical school. I was thinking neuroscience or neurology. I mean neurosurgery or neurology. Like in my second year of medical school, I had the chance to like go into a theater. It wasn't neurosurgery actually; it was colorectal surgery. But the consultant made me involved, allowed me to assist. I was like, wow, this is so cool. But I kind of put it at the back of my mind still. And then in my third year of medical school, I had my first experience of neurosurgery case. It was a patient that came with chronic subdural hemorrhage. I had seen that patient the before surgery. She was super confused, a lot of like neurological deficits and so on. And I actually did the borehole and like went to see the patient the next day, and I was like, wow, like look at what I've done. I mean, I know I didn't do it alone, but it just like wow, look at the difference I've made. And it's mostly like making difference to patients' life, the practical aspect, but also the outcomes in neurosurgery are quite poor. Actually, a lot of times the things don't go well for patients, so I'm aware of that. But it's mostly making difference to patient life, like the science behind it. I've been involved in a couple of research projects as well, and I really enjoy research, and I feel there are a lot of unanswered questions in neurosurgery research, like treatment for glioblastoma, or like how do you treat spinal cord injury and so on. So it's a mixture of things, really.
Those are my particular interests, particularly spinal cord injuries and glioblastoma, because it seems like, I mean, for glioblastoma, it seems like no matter what you do, prognosis is still poor. You might have done a fantastic surgery, and then prognosis is still 12 months, 6 to 12 months,
Mm-hmm.
12 months cap. And then for spinal cord injury, kind of almost like it's a disruption of one's life in quote, if I may put it that way. I mean, I remember we had the patient, 23-year-old patient, who went diving in the swimming pool and had a C6, C7 subluxation, and that was it. Down, quadriplegic. And you're like, I mean, despite your best abilities in terms of fixing the fracture and all, but the spinal cord is injured, and then because of the very poor neuroplasticity, it's, I mean, those are like my research, my interest in terms of spinal cord injuries. I mean, I know medicine has advanced a lot, but there's still a lot of grounds to cover. A lot of grounds to cover.
Yeah, I think this discussion has been really interesting, at least for me particularly, and insightful too. So just to is there a way we Dr. Tara, is there a way we can get your presentation after this?
Uh, yes, I think I can share it. So I'll just
Or- so
probably just.
well, I'll be able to share it with those in SIGAF, the neurosurgery group. I don't know how. Okay, I'll look to see if I can mail it to the others who joined.
Okay.
Thank you very much. And please, if you still have any questions, comments, please, you could post it on the chat box. Thank you all for joining.
Thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. So it's a really, really, really nice one. Since we're still waiting, I think I can still ask some questions. When you want to apply, is there any fail proof safe? Like say you could apply to internal. I know that you can apply as wide as I said apply wide, like maybe not applying to only neurosurgery and applying to like other like neurology now as a backup plan in case you don't get any interviews. Like is that kind of
Well, people say. I mean, you can do that depending on if you're saying if you're not getting into a neurosurgery program, you don't mind getting into a neurology program. But there are people who are like, oh, it's neurosurgery or nothing. Because the thing is, if you get into a neurology program, it's not like there's a direct pathway to cross into a neurosurgery program. So you might have to make um, peace with the fact that you might end up doing a neurology program. However, because of the advent in fact in neurology, if one is that keen on working with one's hands, you can do endovascular neurology as a fellowship where you don't you still get to use your hands. So for instance, neurology is 4 years in the US, and then you can do a fellowship for about 2 years. So by the time you're done with your fellowship, you're still a resident in neurosurgery. I mean, so I mean, some people decide to consider that pathway and say, well, I mean, I still get to do stuff with the nervous
I think
system.
that's something that people like consider. Like if I went
Yeah, I still
to
got to use
have
my
a
hands.
PLC, like interventional neurology and all of that. I've heard about it. I think we still have 5 more minutes. If you have any question, please post it on chat box. I understand that you could also do spine surgery through orthopedics. Not like there's another route to spine. Like if you're interested in spine, so I think that's also like a viable option. If you want to do spine.
Well, so neurosurgery is brain and spine, but if predominantly what you want is spine, like just spine. Yeah, I mean, yeah, but and then when you say spine, the spine for orthopedics would be limited to more of like the bony component, right?
Okay, rather than the spinal cord and
Then, so for instance, I don't know if orthopedic surgeons, I don't think so, in terms of if you have like an intradural tumor, I don't think they go as far as taking that out. I don't think I know they can. So, for instance, where I am right now, we do a lot of spine surgeries. So we do for patients with um, degenerated discs and people with disc herniations, people with spondylosis, spondylolisthesis. We do all of that, which orthopedic surgeons can do. So they can do spinal fusions, they can do laminectomies and stuff like that. But when it comes to you're dealing with maybe, so for instance, we had a patient with an arachnoid cyst. That was about some weeks ago. I mean, I don't think orthopedic surgeons would. I don't think so. I don't think they would do that. So depending on when you say spine, do you mean just spine in terms of the bony component
sorry, I
alone?
lost my connection. Okay.
Yeah, or in terms of the spinal cord. Timothy, or do you have any insight on that? Do orthopedic surgeons in the UK, do they go as far as meddling with the spinal cord?
I mean, I know that some patients are coming with like traumatic spinal cord injuries. They are managed by orthopedic spinal surgeons. But actually, I'm not very aware of the differences, and it's something I need to look into. But I know they manage those patients in the UK.
Okay, but for spinal cord tumors or tumors of the spinal cord itself, do they delve into that? Do you know?
I've seen them manage metastatic spinal cord compression, but I
Okay.
don't know if they manage primary tumors of the spine.
Okay.
It's something I need to look into.
Yeah, I'm not so sure also, so I'm not I don't know how much.
So I think we're gradually coming to the end. Still, if you have any questions, can quickly press it out to send it. And if there's any advice you give the young ones, medical students, still in medical school, like who really are keen in neurosurgery? Okay, I think you have what are the chances of matching to neurosurgery programs? Okay, like Mayo Clinic or okay.
Well, like they would say, or it's commonly said, impossible is nothing, but it will require a lot of a lot of um, a lot of improvement, or a lot of it will require a very competitive portfolio to get into such program. You know, when I also the one of the webinars on the NREF stuff that I shared. So I remember the program director saying that although the average that used to be considered for step one was about 241 for US grads, the guy is a program director at Mayo. He was saying that theirs was, I think their intake of residents at that cycle was about 265. So that was at Mayo, and I'm like, oh my god, like that's a lot. And then that's in addition to your research work, because those are like very academic programs. So those are programs that they are looking at best of the best, your research, your scores, your letters of recommendation. So I'm not going to say it's impossible, but it's a lot. It's going to take a lot. It's going to take a whole lot.
But do you know like any program that is friendly in neurosurgery like to IMGs, like IMG friendly off your head?
So, so the that site I shared, the residency,
Okay.
yeah, what's the name again? Just skipped my mind. So I'm sorry, that just skipped me. But one of the sites I shared earlier, there's another one, Match a Resident. So those ones
Oh,
kind of, and then if you check Frida, you can see the number of the requirements, and then you can see the number of IMGs that have matched into the
match
program.
into those
And then
programs.
yeah, and then you can see if they have any IMGs in their program,
Oh,
and
okay.
like if they've had any IMGs, and then IMGs, and then they then see how well you compare with people that have similar portfolio as you, and then
That's
that will kind of just give you an idea of well how well you measure up.
all right. So I think the meeting was scheduled to end by 8:30, if I'm not mistaken. All right. So I think we can all agree that it's been a fantastic session with Dr. Tayo and Dr. Demitayo. Very, very interesting talking to you guys and learning about the pathways into neurosurgery training in the US. So I think if there are no more questions, I think we could bring this meeting to a close. All right, all right. So thank you everyone. Thank you so much, Dr. Tayo, for taking time out to really highlight this pathway for us and teaching us. Thank you, Dr. Demitayo, for facilitating. Thank you everyone that joined. It was really, really nice being with you.
Thank you very much.